Hiring managers have read it. What was the most, what is wrong with this person, moment during an interview? Story 1. To start the interview, I asked him to tell us, 3 people, a little bit about himself. 35 minutes later, he stopped talking. Usually people answer this question in 1 to 5 minutes. It was incredibly awkward and I was tempted to interrupt him, but then truly wanted to see how long he would go. Story 2. When she listed all of her ex-boyfriends that currently worked there and said she couldn't wait to see the look on their faces when she showed up to work. This was in the first 3 minutes of the interview, so I wasn't even close to offering the job yet. I cut the interview right there and sent her on her way. Story 3. The strangest thing ever was a man telling us all about his mom's Alzheimer's, talking bad about our company and getting upset when we didn't offer him the position on the spot. It was a wild ride from beginning to end. Story 4. I once had a candidate for an intermediate-level analyst brag during an interview that he used to work other jobs and play poker, while working his primary office job. For example, for about 2 weeks, before he was caught and got fired from both jobs, he would take long lunches. No one knew where he went between 10:30 and 1:30. Turns out he had gotten a job making pizzas at the next-door pizza restaurant and worked the lunch rush. He also bragged about playing poker at work constantly. This was in the late 2000s, while online poker was still in its boom. He bragged these things to me as if I, a relatively young professional at the time, would think he was cool. Or maybe he thought it demonstrated his ability to multitask and still get his job done. I have no idea. Either way, we did not extend him an offer. Story 5. Me. I see you managed a vegetarian restaurant. Interviewee. What? Me. It says here you managed a vegetarian restaurant. Interviewee. Oh, I guess I did write that. Not really, though. My girlfriend had an art exhibition, and I organized the sandwiches for the opening. They were vegetarian. This was a candidate that was otherwise pretty impressive and had been among the favorites for a quite sought-after position. The interview had even gone quite well up until this point. Met him later at a party. He had no memory of me. Story 6. I interviewed a gal once, and while we were talking, I was looking over her resume. Please note that her English is her first language, or else this wouldn't have humored me so much. Her mission statement on her resume was as follows. Along with my detail-oriented and organization skills, I'll bring encouragement to the team to work cooperatively and creatively to provide an understanding of the visual aspects of our work. Yes, this was for an admin position at a law firm. Not sure what the visual aspect of our work entailed in this position, honestly. I read it over about 5 or 6 times, worried that I was having a stroke, so I didn't really hear much of anything she said during the interview. I haven't been able to make sense of it, no matter how many times I read it. I actually cut it out of her resume and have it sitting on my desk some 15 years later. Story 7. She was a lazy liar. Hiring a business intelligence analyst, there are a variety of ways to get into this profession. I'm open to many of them. Frankly, if you have a good head on your shoulders and know even basic SQL, I can probably work with you. Though lately I've had to get pickier as our projects have become more complex. Boisterous personality, and seems like she'd be a good organizational fit. The problem is she keeps lying, but only halfway. Do you know SQL? Oh yes, I've had years of experience with it. Great, so take a look at this code. This is the sort of thing we do. What's this? For some reason though, the most egregious lie that stands out in my head with her was when she commented, when I suggested she not take a particular route to the train station because it was dark and potentially unsafe. Also, I was headed to the same station and did not wish to commute there, and she said she had a black belt and had practiced martial arts for years. Oh cool, what discipline? I don't remember. Wow. Story 8. Hiring for a senior dev position. Had a telephone interview and she seemed confident and competent, so I flew her down for an on-site interview. She calls not me, but the front desk receptionist, and says she can't drive in a big city and needs a car to pick her up, and she refuses to get to the rental car we reserved, before Uber and Lyft. The call is transferred to me and I tell her to take the train, Atlanta or MARTA. No, she says, too scary. I tell her to go to the taxi stand and take that. Nope, afraid of taxis. She wants a corp limo to pick her up and nothing else will do. She's adamant. I put her on hold and have a chat with my boss who says just send her home, she's too much work if she can't even handle this. I tell her thank you for taking the time to fly down, but not even her own VPs get that treatment, and to go ahead and change her ticket to fly home now. She then starts telling me she'll get a taxi, etc. I said please don't bother, it will be a waste of everyone's time, thank you and goodbye. Not once when setting up her travel plans did she say she needed assistance getting from the airport. It was explained to her she would pick up a rental car at the airport. She was fine with it. No idea what she was thinking, but ain't nobody got time for that nonsense. Story 9. We had a shortlisted candidate come for a campus interview. This usually includes meeting with the dean, a long interview with a full hiring committee, a formal meeting with a department chair, dinner with a hiring committee, a formal job talk, 1-hour academic lecture, teaching a sample undergrad course and meeting some students, as well as a campus tour. During the job talk, he kept flashing the pink satin liner of his suit jacket in the direction of one of our openly gay grad students. Everyone noticed. Later, he proceeded to get trashed during the meet and greet with the students at a local bar and confided all of the dirt about his current department and overshared the status of his rocky relationship with a grad student back at his home university. A big no-no, even though it happens sometimes. The next morning sealed the big fat no. A grad student usually volunteers and is compensated to drive the candidate back to the airport. This person kept trying to persuade the openly gay grad student to drive him instead, even though another student, female, already had the task assigned to her. He didn't get an offer. Story 10. I set up an interview for an acquaintance's nephew with a company looking to hire 30 college students for summer work. The nephew's major and the line of work this company performed seemed to mesh perfectly, and I knew the hiring manager personally, so it seemed like a great fit. A couple of weeks later, the acquaintance emails asking about the job, so I hit up my hiring manager friend and the conversation went something like this. Me. Hey, how'd the round of hiring go? HR. Great. Needed to fill 30 spaces and only had to do 31 interviews to fill them. Me. Oh, cool. So was Paul X one of them? HR. Oh, him. Yeah, well, he was in pajamas during the interview, so we declined. Me. What? Are you serious? I find it hard to believe he would show up to an interview like that. HR. Well, it was a Skype interview, and when we brought up his video feed, he was laying in bed. Me. Oh, well, maybe he thought you couldn't see him. Maybe he thought it was just an audio meeting. HR. We told him we could see him, and he said sorry. We asked if he wanted to go reschedule, and he said no, he was good. So yeah, we decided to pass. Sorry, Paul. Story 11. I was performing a video interview with a candidate. They were clearly in a large room and bedroom, with most of it visible in the background, but it was clean, so I didn't mind. In the back right corner was a closed door. About 7 minutes into the interview, I see the door open slightly and some dude pokes his head in, sees that his roommate or girlfriend was in an interview, then closes the door. Not a big deal, it happens. I ask my next question and let the candidate respond, but then, about 30 seconds later, I see the door slowly open again. Only this time, the dude comes crawling out of the bottom. He continues to crawl across the floor, making his way to the opposite side of the room. I assume he thought he was out of the camera's field of view, but he was clearly visible. He gets to the far end of the room and turns to scratch his butt while facing away from the camera. Finally, he finishes up with whatever he was doing and makes his way back and out the door. I know I should have stopped the candidate and had her deal with the dude, but it was so funny to watch I had to let it play out. I could barely contain my laughter, and after the interview finished, I lost it. She got the job though, and from what I remember, was a great employee. Story 12. We were looking for a sous chef that would be able to work and train for a few months, and then eventually fill my shoes as chef de cuisine as I was leaving in about 6 months' time. We were a big, very successful restaurant in a super competitive city, and had a ton of applications and interviews. Most interviews for a chef position include a pretty informal chat with the hiring chef, the owner, and the general manager, and a cooking and tasting portion, where the interviewee plans a menu of 5 or 6 dishes and serves them to the interviewers. One guy came in and killed the vibe of the interview, and served incredible dish after incredible dish, but the owner didn't like him because the guy interviewing was tattooless and 50+ years old, and he felt that this guy's age wasn't conducive to our hip, late-night vibe. Whatever. You do, Jeff, you insufferable human. The owner calls me a few days later and tells me that he found a guy that he wanted to poach from a small bistro just outside of town. This guy comes in and is super cool. Fresh jacket, oozing confidence, and a ton of cooking tattoos. The owner is in love, and I'm hoping that the guy's into overweight guys with chef jackets that are 2 sizes too small. Before the interview, all candidates had to send over an ingredient list so that we could order any ingredients that they may need for the cooking portion of the interview. And this guy had requested some foie gras for a dish he said he had been awarded time and again. A foie and a lobster crepe. Didn't sound very good to me, but I was willing to give it a shot and see how it went. After the meeting, the guy went into our kitchen and started cooking. After about 10 minutes, we all hear the guy screaming at one of our prep cooks to slice him some chives. A few minutes after, he brings out the app, which he says is his take on shrimp and grits, something that is already on our menu, and that he says is better than ours. I point out a few things. The shrimp is overcooked, the grits are gluey, and the chives he was so stressed out about weren't even on the plate. He tells me that the problem was that our prep cook didn't speak English and that when he was chef, he would make sure the entire BOH staff was fluent. After 2 more dismal dishes, he tells us that he's going to make his famous crepes. I am pumped, because I know that it is going to be an absolutely bad show. The dude is in the kitchen for at least 45 minutes, screaming and throwing stuff around. I go back into the kitchen to see what the guy's doing, and he's fiddling with a Vitamix, which looks like it's full of caulk. I ask him what's going on, and he tells me he's just blending the crepe batter. I point out that crepe batter usually doesn't have the consistency of modeling clay, and he pretty much tells me to leave, that this dish has won awards. I look over at his phone, which is out on the table, and see that there is a recipe from a website for crepes pulled up on it. So not only does this guy not know how to make his signature dish, but he can't even follow a simple recipe. He brings his dish out, and it's a mess. Burnt foie, rubbery lobster, broken béarnaise, etc. The concept sucked, but the execution was somehow even worse. The crepe itself, though, was a culinary disaster. I straight up told him that it was one of the worst things I'd seen produced in a kitchen, and he pushed back, saying that it would have been great if my staff had given him the support he needed. Despite my protests, we hired him. The owner thought that he was cool and projected the kind of image we needed. He lasted about a month before I threw this dude out of my kitchen, which the owner never forgave me for. I called the old guy and offered him the job, and he essentially told me to get bent, because he knew he deserved the job in the first place, and he was right. Story 13. We have a very simple pre-employment test. If you have been in our industry for more than a year, you should get 100%. Sometimes we even give it as an at-home test. We had one guy that took his test home and had it for over a week. He brought it to the formal interview and got 90% of the questions wrong, even though according to his resume, he was an all-star and knew everything. He had an excuse for every wrong answer to even the most widely known questions in our industry. It would be the equivalent of saying you have been laying sod for 20 years and then putting the green side down. He didn't get the job. Story 14. I did a phone interview with a guy and he seemed really excited and very friendly. He seemed to be relatively new to the field, but we were willing to give him a chance. I invited him to come in for an in-person interview. My manager and I were doing the second interview, and when I called him in, he gave me a huge hug and proceeded to talk to me like I was his best friend. As a 27-year-old woman, I was incredibly uncomfortable and froze up. At the end of the interview, we told him we would reach out to him within the next couple of weeks to let him know the outcome. His interview was not great either, and he was not a good fit for the job. My manager was the one who had to call him to let him know he didn't get the job. However, he proceeded to call my phone every day that week and left me long voicemails. Most of the time, he'd ask about his interview, but sometimes he'd say things like, "Hey girl, how are things going? I was thinking if I get hired, we should hang out." It freaked me out, and I had my manager call him early to give him the news that he did not get the job. The calls did not stop, and I just kept deleting his voicemails without listening. My manager and I were so disturbed by his persistence that we went to HR for help. They must have done something because the calls stopped after that. Story 15. Not a manager, but I was the interviewee. I wasn't feeling well that morning, but I had an interview with a super cool science museum as a promotions event coordinator. It would have been the perfect job. I decided to go anyway. As I drove to the interview, I felt horrible. When I went inside, I was feeling worse. I was asked to sit and wait for the hiring manager to come to get me. I knew I had made a mistake in coming. I got up and followed her across the whole museum and up 2 flights of stairs. It felt like it was 120 degrees there. And finally, as we were walking toward her office and she reached for the door handle, my stomach let go. I barely made it to the trash can right next to me and proceeded to vomit for a good 2 minutes. When I was finished, I looked up and she had her back to me with her head in her hands like she was trying to hold it together. I said I was sorry and I hoped she had a better day than me, and I turned around and left. Man, that would have been a fun job. Story 16. I have 2 stories. The first is back in college days. We were interviewing for a new college newspaper reporter. The question was, this position requires an energetic, inquisitive, and outgoing person who can chase a story and get the facts. With that in mind, how would you describe yourself? The answer was, fun. Care to elaborate on that? No. They did not get the position. The second one was for an IT position in my late career. An individual that had been fired from one branch of a government agency decided to apply for another branch a few years later, but his resume read very much differently than reality. Instead of him being fired for essentially not knowing how to do his primary job function, he let go when the project closed, 3 years after he was fired. Also, all his resume achievements listed for that time are things either myself or one of my coworkers had accomplished, things that he didn't even have any involvement with. I guess he didn't realize we were on the hiring panel because we had merged with another region. I honestly don't fathom how he thought that was going to work out, because it was the same agency and it's not like we wouldn't have noticed. Story 17. She cried 3 times during the interview about how much she hated her current job. My coworker had to get up and grab a box of tissues for her. When she finally calmed down, she informed us that she'll need a special desk chair due to an injury she sustained at her current job. And yes, she did have a workers' compensation court case against that job, and she hoped to win big. No one had said anything about hiring her. She just made an assumption that she got the job, I guess. The icing on the cake was that she was interviewing for a workers' compensation job at a firm where we only represent employers, never injured people. While that doesn't influence hiring decisions, talking at length about her current case against her boss was just a weird thing to bring up. That and crying. I'm pretty well acquainted with employment and comp law. She didn't get turned down because she had a comp case. Crying 3 times, believe it or not, did the trick for taking her off the callback list. It felt really bad for her, but dude, you can't do that in an interview. Story 18. I hire students or university workers. One of my questions is, tell me about a time at work when you made a mistake and how you fixed it. The kid had no prior work experience, so I modified the question to remove the at work part. I thought he'd tell me about messing up at school or at home, and no. He told me about the time when he ripped his pants in gym class in the 4th grade. He didn't tell me how he fixed the situation either, so I'm assuming his pants are ripped to this day. This kid was a goldmine of what not to do in an interview, to be honest. He did not get the job. Story 19. In a case study interview, I prefaced everything by saying, look, this case is designed to see how you break a problem down and analyze it. I won't give you enough information up front to solve it right away. You'll have to ask questions to get more information. The final answer is important, but more important is that you show me your analytical process. This might take 15 to 30 minutes. The candidate then listened to the 30-second exposition of the case study, which as promised did not include enough information to solve it. Her immediate response was, I think the answer is X. I asked why she thought so, and she said, that's just what my judgment tells me. I asked if she could quantify how she came up with X, but she just pointed back to judgment and intuition. My pen went down, I leaned back in my chair, and I wondered how to politely bring the interview to an immediate close. Wondering if she was right? No, she wasn't close. But even if she had been, it wouldn't have been because she was intuitively brilliant. It would have been a lucky guess. She didn't yet have a shred of information she could use to make a good guess. You're looking to measure utilization and profitability among a group of service professionals. What's the gross margin that they're generating, and how does utilization impact gross margin? Without asking, and how are we defining utilization and gross margin, you can't even begin to start solving the problem. She just threw some numbers out there. I strongly recommend taking whatever your interviewer says or does at face value without trying to figure out the hidden thing they want from you. When I tell you that the analytical process is more important than the final answer, take that to heart and show me your analytical process. If you're unsure, ask. Would you rather work for a company that values transparent communication and frankness, or a company that values mind reading? Story 20. Obligatory, not a hiring manager, but I still had to interview some candidates. Some of the walls in the office were painted a vague brownish color. Partway through the interview, this guy starts looking around with a really spaced out look and says, this office really reminds me of a cardboard box, but not in a bad way. Like the kind of box that you put things in, you know? He then decided that he didn't want the job and left before the interview was over.